There's an interesting bit of research that was done years ago that showed that unstructured interviews give you worse results than blind resume scoring. You'd be better off just reading the resumes and scoring them in a structured way and never interviewing somebody than doing unstructured interviews.
You have an analytical mind, engineering background. How do you bridge the gap when assessing performance between the qual and quant side of it and then putting it into the context of a larger organization and understanding an ROI in an employee?
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring in the best and the brightest from the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Today's guest is Hugo Malan, a true force in workforce solutions with a career spanning engineering, finance, retail, and talent strategy. He's led major transformations at Kelly Services, Employed Bridge, CDI, and even Sears. Yes, the toy and fitness division. We got to hear about Sears. I used to love Sears, man. From Barclays to Lehman Brothers to McKinsey and Los Alamos National Labs, he's tackled everything from a high-stake investment to cutting-edge tech. With a PhD in engineering and a mind for analytics, he's revolutionizing how businesses find and leverage top talent. Hugo, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I mean, I think with tech, you can never count on it, right? Is any tech reliable these days? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there's a school of thought that says our computers have reached consciousness a long time ago. They're just hiding it and messing with us. And there are days when that really seems like it's the case.
So you're trying to tell me that the computers are obviously smarter than us. They understand EQ, IQ, empathy, and they're just screwing with us? Is it one big trick, Hugo?
I wouldn't be entirely surprised. They seem to have entered a world where they're not deterministic anymore. From one day to the next, the same little button works or doesn't work. It continues to mystify me. And I have a bit of a background in tech, but I find it as perplexing as everybody else.
So let's get into it. I was intrigued. I was deeply intrigued. I get a lot of outreach from PR for different guests on the show. And I spend a good amount of time on each of them. I want to give it the due diligence. I was fascinated with your background. It spans everything from tech, engineering, and finance. But I'm always curious, the origin story, if you don't mind me asking, what did your parents do for a living?
It's going back a bit. My dad started
I said we're going to go back.
As a nuclear physicist, and my mom was a botanist, so two scientists. But her first love was music and art, so she translated that into painting beautiful flowers and being an artist with a kind of a botanist streak. And my dad, from originally being a researcher, ultimately became a general manager and kind of a business president.
So you have that in your DNA, right? The pedigree's there, the DNA is there. But where did the focus on people and talent come from?
That was a bit of a random eventuality. I joined initially, as you pointed out, Los Alamos, then I even worked for a little tech startup in London, and then I worked for a consulting firm in New York. And it was all very much with an analytical focus. So it wasn't engineering anymore, but it was certainly heavy business analytics. And then out of the blue, I got a call from an executive recruiter about a role at Lehman Brothers. Mm-hmm. And at that time, Lehman looked like the place to be. They were doing incredibly well. And this was a new role that was supposed to do analytical modeling of the impact of talent on business performance. And they styled it the head of talent strategy. But the idea was literally to figure out where do we have higher densities of talent in businesses where there's slow growth or lower ROI, and could we take some of that talent and move it over to businesses where we have potentially more ROI and higher growth, with a strong kind of quantitative underpinning. And so as I started getting into it, I realized that, this is an area about which I know nothing. I can potentially do the math, but before you do the math, you need to be able to measure talent and understand what actually does drive performance in people. And that led me on a whole journey to try and understand, well, what is the underlying theory of measuring people and assessing people?
So let's get into that a little bit. You have an analytical mind, engineering background. How do you bridge the gap when assessing performance between the qual and quant side of it, and then putting it into the context of a larger organization and understanding an ROI in an employee?
Well, you can never and should never reduce people simply to numbers, but you do want to bridge that gap. So on the one hand, the way we often talk about it is there's what a person did.
Mm-hmm.
What is their business performance? What are the measurable elements of that? Did they achieve the goals that were set for them or they set for themselves? And that's typically fairly unambiguous. But the other piece that is just as important, particularly as you become more senior in your role, is how you did it. If you're breaking a lot of glass alongside accomplishing great things, that's not as valuable as somebody who can accomplish great things without breaking all that glass. And so assessing those two dimensions gives you a pretty good sense of ultimately what is somebody's contribution in the company.
So let's take a little bit of an off-script left turn here. In the news, we're seeing that the new DOGE department of the government is cutting a lot of waste. And my opinion, it looks like it's a lot more meat cleaver versus scalpel approach there. We'll try to figure it out afterwards. What are your thoughts? Like, removing the politics from it, from the approach that they're taking here, trying to reduce waste in government. Would you approach it similar? How would you go about for such a mass scale? I mean, the U.S. government is the largest enterprise organization on the face of the earth, pretty much. What are they doing right? What are they doing wrong here?
Oh,
I'm getting spicy today, Hugo.
Yeah, I can tell. Those are big questions. I think in general, if ultimately we can make the government more efficient, then we're all better off. If we can do more with the existing tax dollars or do the same with less tax dollars, ultimately, I think those are goals that not a lot of people would debate. Now, to your specific question, how they're going about it, you have to start somewhere, and sometimes you do have to start in a fairly loud way to make folks understand you're serious.
Mm-hmm.
There is a phenomenon, and you find this in government, you also find this in the private industry, where people tend to want to wait something out because there's a lot of initiatives that come and go, and eventually they disappear without a trace. As long as you wait a few years, people completely forgot that these things even ever started. And that's just as common in government as it is in business. So sometimes, in order to get folks' attention and to really make it clear that you mean business, you have to start with a bang. At the same time, if you start in a way that ultimately antagonizes everybody, where you're trying to drive change on a large scale, and ultimately you'll have to bring folks along with the change that you're making and get them bought in to the change that you're making, you need to think really carefully about the tone that you strike.
I love that response. And in the same breath, we take a look at a company like Meta, and they announced layoffs, and they announced that they were letting go of their bottom performers. And so many people across social media were in an uproar. And I pushed back and said a couple things. First of all, isn't it a company in this capitalistic society that we live in here, a private or even public company, either they're beholden to the shareholders or it's a private organization, there's always going to be bottom performers. I mean, go back to the GE for 30, 40 years. You're always letting go of bottom performers. A company shouldn't have to keep bottom performers. Why were so many people in an uproar? This isn't anything new. I mean, an organization should be able to, let go of people that aren't doing the job they're hired for.
No, I think ultimately that's essential. That's a critical part of capitalism, that a company should deploy its resources in the most optimal way. And spending dollars on a particular category of people, if you're not getting a return on it, at the end of the day, is not good for the shareholders. It's not good for the company, but it's also not good for the other people at the company.
Of course.
And that's the thing that I think folks sometimes overlook. If you keep people that are visibly underperforming, generally the team around them are quite aware of this, probably more aware than you think.
Of course.
And it's demoralizing for everybody else that are actually delivering what they need to deliver. Now, when you start taking those sorts of actions, though, one of the key things, I believe, is to allow people to depart the company with as much dignity as possible. Because we're not talking about people who are bad people. We're simply talking about people who are not in the right job. And you're not doing them a favor by keeping them in that job. The quicker you make the decision and the quicker they move on, even if it's at the time potentially painful, the more likely it is that they're going to find a place where they can thrive and be successful that is more suited to their skills and to their demeanor and their approach. And it also allows you to then put somebody in that position that within your company has the opportunity to be successful and be a great contributor, and ultimately, not have that demoralizing impact that somebody who's underperforming will have on the broader organization.
And I love that perspective. One of the things I've been thinking about, going back to the government layoffs, I mean, they're trying to trim waste, but what they're doing is they're putting so many people into the unemployment category in a brutal market right now. And I just try to wrap my head around the levers. Do you consider an employee that you're not letting go? Is it almost like a government subsidy because you're keeping someone employed? It's tough to wrap your head around. And me as a recruiter who works with people that are unemployed and trying to find opportunities for them, you hit the nail on the head with the Meta situation, which I think they did incorrectly. Is you're labeling someone as a poor performer. You're not setting them up for a quote unquote smooth transition, and the optics don't look good when they're out there in the job market.
Yeah, that's right. I think the assessment of being a poor performer against whatever standard you happen to set inside the company should be something that stays inside the company. If you have a wave of people departing, which you very publicly label in a particular way, I don't know if that's helpful to either the company or to those folks, because it might be making it a little bit harder to attract the next wave of people if they know that might be their outcome. Now, it's difficult to really judge, and I don't think it's right to criticize from the outside without knowing all the details, and I don't in this particular case. So I'm not pronouncing in any way positively or negatively on Meta, but I think there are some things to take into account that I have personal experience with in these sorts of situations that are worth remembering.
So someone like yourself who's been around the block, you've worked at organizations of all different sizes, and I'm sure you consult friends and family and colleagues along the way. What's that best advice you would give to someone who's been downsized versus fired, right? In this job market right now, right? There's one thing getting fired, poor performance, and one thing being RIF, reduction in force. What advice do you give your friends and family out there in the job market?
Look, from the person affected's perspective, it really doesn't make a difference.
It's true.
They have the same challenge. They want to find the next job, and they want to find a job that they can be happy in and they're going to be successful in. And so there are definitely a few things. You start with what you want to do. Start with what you enjoy doing, and then what you're good at. And hopefully there's an intersection of those three things: what you want to do and what you're good at, and what you really enjoy doing. And if you can figure that out, then focus all your attention on finding a job where you can do those things. Because
Perfect
that job might take a little more searching, but it's better to take a focused approach like that than to try and just blanket the market with a gazillion applications.
And that's what we're seeing so much right now, and I've been there before. I've been my longest stretch about 9 months out of work, and you get to a point of desperation, and it affects you physically and mentally. And and that's when people start to get desperate, and they spray and pray, and they just apply to so many things, and it's creating diminishing returns on the talent pipeline right now, where companies are under-resourced from a recruiter perspective. They're being overflooded by applications, and people are applying to roles that they're just 100% unqualified for, and it's a real problem right now. So let's get the show back where I wanted to go before I made a left turn that I in the moment I was like, I want to go here because this guy knows what he's talking about. Just to set the stage for everybody, how do we define, for anybody out there who's not in our industry listening, how do we define workforce solutions? It's a blanket term, but in your world, how do you define it?
There's a number of services inside that broad category that a company of the scale of a Kelly, where I'm fortunate enough to work, will offer. So starting at the one kind of end of the spectrum and working my way across in no specific order, but there's permanent placement services or direct hire. Somebody needs to hire somebody. They don't feel they're seeing all the right candidates. They come to us and we bring them a broader slate of candidates. Ultimately, they select from that, and there's a fee paid for that. That's kind of a simple business, but still a large business out there. There's payrolling, where you simply want to have somebody else employ somebody on your behalf for a variety of reasons. You've already found the candidate, and so we will do that. Then there's classic staffing, where you need somebody likely on a temporary basis. It might be to do a particular project. It might just be because your demand is temporarily spiked. And so we'll provide candidates. A client will pick a candidate through an interview process or similar. And ultimately, once they've picked one, we will then employ them on their behalf. They work at the client or they work remotely for the client. They submit timesheets. We pay them. And ultimately, we send a bill to the client for the cost, plus our internal fees and costs around that.
Now everyone out there understands what we do for a living, right? They understand it. But I want to lift up the hood and dig into your specialty when we talk about workforce transformations. Generally speaking, when you come into an organization, what are those red flags? Why do they need to bring on folks like yourself? Where are those pain points that they can't do something internally?
There's a few. And
let's go with the top couple here, the big boys.
Sure. It could simply be that they don't have the bandwidth or the ability, the internal capacity to source the right people. And there's a certain skill and there's a certain amount of time needed to go and traverse all the databases and play with things like LinkedIn Recruiter and Indeed and Career Builder and other databases out there, and eventually to get a short list of candidates and then to reach out to those candidates and vet and validate and so forth. And if a company is, for example, growing really fast, or if they're a recent start and they haven't yet built out those sorts of capabilities, or if they're simply overwhelmed, then they might turn to us to do all of those things for them. So that's one clear part of the solution. Another pain point is if they don't know how long they will need people, but they need a degree of flexibility in their workforce that allows them to scale up rapidly in response to a project or demand, and then scale back rapidly. That's precisely the value proposition that a staffing company provides, in that we will supply the talent on demand, and then as and when the client no longer needs us, we'll take those folks back and do our best to redeploy them at our other clients. But there's a third category of pain point that I think is increasingly significant, and that's a more sophisticated solution outcome. And that can be something as simple as we need a team of people permanently with this kind of profile. Mm-hmm. And if somebody drops off, you need to replace them, but we are going to contract with you to maintain this team. Or we're going to contract with you to complete this project, do this piece of software design or this piece of engineering work, and we will pay you based on the outcome. Or even we're going to outsource a particular function to you. All of those are services we provide these days so that our client can operate smoothly from a very simple pain point like I need one person to hire, right, to I need this thing solved for me, and it's going to take a team of people and I'm going to pay you based on the outcome. And we're happy to operate across that full spectrum.
So you've been around the block at some incredible organizations, and you've seen leadership and management at the highest level. Do you think, because whatever factors, maybe COVID had to do with it, maybe lack of training, do you think there's like a real deluge, a real gap in folks learning how to be good people managers and understanding what it takes to build teams? Have we lost that somewhere along the way in the last few years? I mean, I feel that at a very ground level swell that folks are not trained to manage. They're not trained to interview. They don't know the right questions to ask candidates. And really what they're doing on interviews is, do I like this person? More than do they have the right skill set to fit the team? What are you seeing out there?
There's a lot of that. I think you touched on two separate issues.
It was two. I can't. It's late in the day for me here. My coffee's ran out.
Learning to manage. All too often, you take the person who was the best individual contributor, you put them in a management role, and they hope they succeed. And that's not always a great fit, especially if there's no training along the way to prepare them for suddenly leading people as opposed to being the individual contributor. And there's an even bigger step when you start leading people who lead other people or lead into functions or lead P&Ls. And a lot of people are not prepared for that along the way. I think companies can do a much better job at providing the sort of training that allows you to make those kinds of career progressions, and instead of just throwing you in at the deep end and hoping you're going to swim at the next level. Learning to recruit and interview people is a whole separate skill.
Yeah, let's get into that. That's a good one.
Closely related. But there too, I think you're absolutely right. There's so much recruiting that's just either making the determination whether you like the person or not, which is not an irrelevant dimension, but it shouldn't be the only dimension that you're assessing.
Correct.
Or trying to hire somebody that resembles, the recruiter as much as possible. We
No.
see a lot of that too.
Well, like bias is a big problem. And what usually happens are some folks are really good at interviewing and they come in and they look good on paper and they come in and there's a personality match and they interview well and they get the job. They get into the role. And when the rubber hits the road, what they said on paper is not what they could do in person. And I think that's a real problem. And that's why process is so important and proper candidate scoring and having, group interviews and panels. So it's not one person making the decision. And on the flip side, then you have candidates complaining about there's too many interviews. There has to be a happy medium. Is there a secret formula or best practices to working with companies to help them create and define a proper interview process?
Yeah, there's some pretty well-established best practice around this. Yeah, I'm a believer in assessments. Both kind of work style, personality oriented, perhaps competency based, but also cognitive. None of those are pass fail, but they all provide you with a richer set of data points from which to make a decision. And if you can do that earlier in the process, and then in your interviews, double click on the areas of interest, either really drill into areas that have emerged as a strength or areas that seem to be more of a development area. But have that structured process with several interviewers, ideally each focusing on a different area and then comparing notes, ultimately kind of calibrating and scoring together. You can get some really consistently good outcomes with that. There's an interesting bit of research that was done years ago that showed that unstructured interviews give you worse results than blind resume scoring. You'd be better off just reading the resumes and scoring them in a structured way and never interviewing somebody than doing unstructured interviews.
It's absolutely true. And I'm all for assignments within reason, because I think it does two things. I mean, listen, you don't want to give somebody, like, we're talking just general mid-level role here. We're not talking about C-suite. We're just kind of, for the sake of the conversation here. But what I think an assessment does, it also shows that the candidate is truly interested, that they're willing to put a level of effort in. And I think we need to get back to that. We need to get back to that two-sided equation that kind of flips back and forth depending on which way the wind blows and the economy and the sentiment out there. But if you really want a job, you're going to put the work in. And we're not talking about free work. And one thing I despise is when companies give a case study, but it turns out to be real work. If that's the case, you compensate somebody for their time there. But you want to see somebody puts the effort in and they really know what they're talking about. But then we have this thing out there that we have to figure out for if someone's really doing the work called AI. And AI comes into our world on so many levels. And I'm sure you would attest to this. There's such great advantages from a tech standpoint, but there's also a lot of areas where we need to figure out, especially in the application process, in the screening process. Generally speaking, what tools are you guys using over at Kelly? What tools are you guiding your clients on? I don't need specific names on the actual products, but from a use case perspective, where are you seeing those great advances in AI in the world of talent and people?
So AI is really upending the world.
Oh yeah,
hardly a surprising thing to say. For us, it has impact in a number of different directions. The one is obviously in terms of what our clients need. Certain job categories, it's pretty easy to predict, are going to be less in demand going forward. Other categories are going to be more in demand. Certain really relevant categories, such as experts in data science and machine learning, at this point are incredibly difficult to source for, and will likely become even more so as we see the data center explosion kind of proliferate across the US. So there's that one dimension of the impact, and we're trying to pivot with our clients. Now, Kelly has been around for 75 years. We've gone through quite a few different transformations.
Back to the horse and buggy, fax machines, beepers. We've seen it all. VCRs. I'm dating myself now. Yeah.
So that one I feel we're well equipped to pivot with. The other one, though, and we've gone through a few of these transformations too, but they tend to be in some ways more difficult, is changing how you work internally. Asking yourself, do you still need to do the things that you used to do? You don't have to go back too many decades where every staffing company of a certain size prided itself on its card catalog of profiles. And that database of people that was literally written on little cards was its secret sauce. Well, we went well past that. Everybody, if they're prepared to pay a few license fees, can get access to almost unlimited databases out there. But there's other things that you need to do these days that AI can really drive efficiency around. One of them, an obvious case, is simply pre-screening candidates. Another is doing matching between, on the one hand, profiles, and on the other hand, job descriptions. It's an extremely good application for something like a large language model to parse a job description, pull it apart into skills and experiences and other things that are required, and then compare that to similarly parsed profiles on the other side of candidates and find a short list of good matches.
Hey everybody, Adam here from the Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the team at Fountain. Fountain is your full-service frontline workforce management platform. I have to tell you, Fountain's offerings are some of the most robust I've seen for any product in the space. They offer full solutions for hiring, managing, and retention. They are truly a one-stop shop focused on the frontline workforce. They also create informative content using their data. For example, they analyze a bunch of data from their fast food chains and created a trend report you could download now on their website. They also have a new ebook out called Frontline Voices. There's a lot to dive into. Certainly check it out. And you could learn more at fountain.com, linked in the show notes. Thank you. Is AI going to take people's jobs? Are we there? Should people really be concerned right now? And if so, what should they do about it?
So there's as many predictions about this as I think there are forecasters out there.
I'm picking lotto numbers, right? Yeah.
Look, one person's point of view, for what it's worth, I think much like other dramatic tech transformations in the past, AI is going to enhance productivity by changing the way people work and eventually making their jobs focus on the things that only humans can do and taking all the stuff off their plate that humans cannot do. Now, you could argue that means we're going to do the same amount of work with a lot fewer humans and a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. That's not the way it played out in the past. We ended up just doing a lot more with the same amount of humans because their productivity dramatically increased. So my belief is AI is largely going to have the same sort of impact.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if we want to go back in the history lesson too, let's look, back at the advent of the automobile and Henry Ford. I mean, we all know who he is, incredible innovator in the space of workforce, but you had a lot of folks that were shoemakers for horses, right? They were in that industry. And guess what? The car's coming to replace a lot of the horses. The smart folks, they upskilled. They learned how to work in manufacturing. I think we're going to go along the same route where you need to embrace the tech if you're an employee. You need to make yourself invaluable right now. Because the role's going to change to whether you call it a prompt engineer or what you call it. How are you coming to your organization showing how you could do your job better, faster, more efficient, and add value to your organization? And I say this to so many folks on a one-to-one level when I'm having conversations with them. I ask them, what tools are you using? Are you using a simple tool like Grammarly on your emails? Are you learning how to use the tech? Are you learning how to embrace it? Are you going deeper? And if not, I promise you're going to get left behind in the dust. So I think there's a lot of responsibility on individual employees to take it upon their own to learn how to use the tech. It's here. It's not going anywhere. And if you follow the news or anything, you see what's happening out there. How do you consult? It's a balance too, right? Like changing the idea of what a role looks like, what a job description looks like. How do you stay in tune with the AI tech and advise clients when you're talking about workforce solutions and types of roles and what those responsibilities are?
Well, personally, I like to stay relatively close to the tech world. I still have a nerd card somewhere in my wallet. And so I like to read a lot of the websites that talk about the recent advances or bicker about them in some cases. But things like Gizmodo, New Atlas, Slashdot, and a few others, Ars Technica, I read relatively or skim relatively regularly. Because that just gives you a sense of where interesting developments are and what are people talking about. But secondly, I also really like to play hands-on with AI tools. And it's so easy. You can go on ChatGPT and play with it, but you can also go on half a dozen other competitors that are out there that you can go play with.
Try them out.
Yeah, they'll all give you accounts for free for the most part. And it's very interesting when you start comparing them side by side. You actually start seeing real differences in their responses, and even just their stylistic approach to answering questions can be quite different. And find one that works for you and then use it. These things are available on your phone, on your computer, and just silly things. You want a new recipe for making eggs? I'm sure ChatGPT has something to say about that.
Yeah. But it comes down to the data in, data out, which is not a new concept at all in the world of computing and even thinking in traditional mindset. I want to shift gears, and I'd love to get your perspective here. COVID really threw the modern workforce into a loop, right? And some argue that, hey, listen, this was a blip that wasn't expected. And we saw so many people, the majority of the white collar workforce move to remote. And now 5 years later, we're in this very strange place where you have so many companies that are mandating folks back to the office. Some are hybrid, some are fully remote, and it's created this storm on so many different levels. You have folks that were hired remotely during the pandemic and now being forced back, and they have to make difficult choices. What's your general thought? What's happening right now? It's a cluster, pardon my French.
Yeah.
Love to get your take here.
Approaching this with different degrees of finesse, shall we say. And I think remote work or hybrid work's here to stay. There are many jobs that there is not a heck of a lot of reason to do in the office. And there's fantastic tools to stay in touch with your co-workers. That said, there's also clear evidence, especially for folks earlier in their career, that you miss out on a lot if you're trying to do a lot remote. So I think what we're seeing at the moment is companies going to and fro quite a lot, but trying to find the right balance. Like everything else, this will shake itself out. I wish it would do so sooner rather than later, because I think you're right. It really is causing a degree of turmoil for employees that's probably not truly necessary. But eventually we'll have best practice established around this, and companies will do things in a certain way, and certain roles will be remote, and certain will be hybrid, and certain will be in the office, and probably to some degree correlated with tenure and success and role.
I want to go back to something you mentioned in that response. It's early tenure employees, and I've been on my soapbox since the pandemic on this one, and I truly believe this. And the Gen Zers and millennials would argue with me till they're blue in the face. If I didn't spend the first, we'll call it 10 years in an office early in my career, learning firsthand directly from folks who I aspire to be at their level, if I didn't watch their body language, if I didn't see their decorum, if I didn't see how they operated, I would not be the professional that I am. And they argue back, oh, we have Slack, we have Zoom calls, but you're missing something there. And their argument is, there's so much waste around the water cooler. There's so much waste of time in the office. I'm so much more efficient at home. I'm like, you don't have a comparison point. You're just a boomer in the room. How do you consult with companies to properly communicate with younger employees why that part is so critical in the office versus saying, no, this is just a power struggle. This is all control. You just want to keep an eye on us. How do you approach that? I didn't say this was going to be easy.
No, but look, I think there's facts kind of coming to light here. There's research that's been done. There's some pretty compelling case studies that compare the productivity and kind of the learning rate of folks who start their career and stay completely remote, and folks who are around their colleagues. So what I would refer clients when they ask about this to are those sorts of case studies. And there's also some questions you can ask about the role. There are certain roles which are by definition more individual. And there are other roles which are just not. It's really difficult, for example, to learn to sell completely on your own. And selling is, in one form or another, what a lot of people end up doing at some point.
Some aspect of your job is to compel somebody to buy or do something for you or with you.
Exactly. And you really need to learn that as an apprentice from a master. That's the most effective way to learn that. So there are certainly roles where I think it's pretty darn clear. And increasingly, I think the Gen Zers and entry-level employees are recognizing this and feeling that they're actually missing out on something by not being in the office. So we'll get the balance right at some point.
And I think there's another big part here too. I think there's a big assumption out there that everybody is more productive at home, or that everybody has a proper desk or workspace at home. I think it's a really misleading assumption. There's a lot of folks out there who do not have that, whether they have small children, elderly relatives living with them. Maybe they're young folks living with 3 people in an urban apartment, and they're all on top of each other working remotely. And then we start to get into performance analysis, right? There may be a single mom at home who's working remotely and she's got the little kids running around, and she's not as productive as a single person working remotely who has no distractions. Some people are just more productive in the office. And I always say, like, there's blanket statements out here, right? Because every company, every role is individual there, but it comes down to choice, options, and trust. If you're giving your employees the trust, I hired you to do what you said you're going to do, and you're doing it. I trust you to get it done. I'm going to give you choices where you decide when and where to work. But the office is here when we have it. A couple days a week, we like for people to be in for team building and camaraderie and that. I think there's a balance there. I think there is a happy medium, right? But then you see someone like Jamie Dimon out there, going on his pulpit about how poor performance are, and all you guys are doing is, emailing and jerking around all day. When you hear someone like Jamie Dimon say that, how does that make you feel?
Look, again, you don't know.
I don't know if they're a client of yours, so I want to be mindful here.
All the context around it. I'm not going to comment on that specifically, but I think
you know what I'm saying here.
I do. No, I think companies should approach this with a degree of sensitivity, and understand that people personally are in very different places and very different positions, and some are going to be working great from home, and some not. And it's worthwhile figuring that out. And if you can, it's not always possible, but if you can set up a system where work from home is an earned privilege, if you're performing at a certain level, then that's something you get to do. Now, if you're the star performer and you're at home, then you, to some extent, depriving everybody else from your example. So that may still not be 100% work from home privilege, but those are the sort of, I think, managerial techniques that's going to develop over time to allow us to manage this in a reasonable way.
Oh, it's fascinating. I mean, I have pages of things I want to discuss with you here, but I want to get to some of the good stuff here that I think is going to be really engaging. I want to throw a hypothetical out there. If you had unlimited resources, Hugo, what is one innovation you would bring to a workforce solution industry right now? What's that dream? What's that whiteboard in your head going on right now? I know you got it going on. You got you're a PhD. You got this engineering mindset. I'm sure you have it. If I said to you, "Bank's open, whatever you want to build," what's on your mind?
It would be an AI-powered tool that has 2 sides to it. The one side facing off to the recruiter, who is constantly describing the precise job they're trying to fill, and that even listens in when the recruiter is talking to the client, describing the precise job that they're trying to fill. And on the other side, reaching out to candidates and testing their interest and their abilities and so on. And towards the candidate side, it'd be great if it's in some way gamified, so that by doing something engaging and entertaining, as opposed to answering a series of questions, the candidate is revealing what they're good at and what they like to do. The perfect staffing company is the one that matches people to jobs that they love and that provide incredibly productive candidates to companies as they're seeking them. And the more we can make that efficient so that both sides end up being super happy, the better off the staffing company, but ultimately the better off society.
I'm listening to that, and I'm very in tune from my position with the podcast that I have an opportunity to speak to so many tech leaders in the TA tech space. And a lot of this is existing, a lot of this has been created, a lot of this is in the work, but to get it all together in one box solution and one good UI and UX flow that works on both sides, we're getting there. And it's incredible. I've had a front row seat to this space right now, and there's such incredible innovation out there where they really are in tune to listening to candidate, client, and candidate and recruiter feedback. And having that mindset, 'cause so many times in this space right now, it's very tech forward, right? They understand the tech, they understand the back end of it, but they're missing the empathy. They're missing the recruiter side of it, the listening to it. So it's a fascinating place. So I want to bring it home here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't kind of get to a question here. So at this point of your, career, you still interview, you still hire. And when someone gets to you in the interview stage in your organization, we're going to assume that they have the experience, they have the skill set. But now you really need to dig in to understand if they're right for the team. And I don't use the F word. I don't use fit. I hate the word culture fit, as we were kind of alluding to earlier. But there has to be a vibe there. There has to be an energy. What's a top secret Yugo Malan question or line of questioning that you dig into when someone sits across from you in an interview?
There's a difficult thing to describe, but you know it when you see it. It's that magic sense that this person, if they join your team, is going to surprise and delight you in ways you can't even imagine right now. They're going to come up with ideas that are creative and new and out of the box and different from what the rest of the team can do. And the way to get at that in an interview is difficult, but it's partly discovering whether they're actually curious about stuff.
Yes.
Is there something, some path that if you start the questioning down there, their eyes light up, they get more excited, and they're exhibiting that kind of curiosity and passion for learning about something or figuring something out that makes them a great employee.
You said the magic words at the end there. It's FIO. How did you FIO? How did you figure it out? Yugo, I've had hundreds of conversations with senior leaders like yourself, and it's the same answer. They want to know how you figured it out. What did you accomplish? What was your contribution, and how did you do it? And it's the same advice I give job seekers at all levels when they're interviewing. Be able to articulate what you did, not the greater team. You could start there and narrow it down. Talk about the problem, how you solved it, and what your contribution was. Inquisitive, asking the right questions. That is what it's all about, folks. So the world of work is changing rapidly before our eyes. What should leaders be doing to really future-proof their organizations at a high level?
Building on my previous answer, they should stay curious. Yeah. Try and be in touch with as many of the trends and the currents that are going to influence their journey as possible. And if they keep an eye on lots of things going on around them, they'll be able to figure out a path to chart down this river and not be surprised by a lateral wave.
Absolutely. What's keeping you up at night these days? What's scaring you?
In AI is clearly a tremendous opportunity. And like we discussed earlier, I think it's going to make us more productive. But there's another development out there that people talk a little less about, but that's going to be as profound, and that's quantum computing. And when eventually those two meet, as surely they will, and you have an AI running on some kind of computing machine that's orders of magnitude more powerful than anything we have today, it's kind of interesting to speculate where that's going to go. But I think we might be facing some interesting choices as a species at that point.
So you're saying Skynet's a real thing and the robots are taking over, the machines are taking over. We should be scared. We should definitely be scared there. So you could tell us about your podcast. What is it all about? Who's it for?
In my podcast, I speak to our clients in general, but it's not exclusively that. It's our clients and other interesting people about doing specific technical work that's unique and unusual. So it might be somebody that, and this is a specific example, that participate in inventing a new way to splice fiber optic cables that's had a profound impact to how we deploy broadband and fiber to the home. Or somebody else who's figured out how to do on a really small scale synthesis of complex biotech compounds so that you can have small batch manufacture of custom therapeutics. So it's these really interesting technical conversations that I think others in that same space who've been wrestling with similar challenges find quite fascinating.
I love it. We're going to link it up in the show notes here. So let's bring it home. Hugo, I'm fascinated by your story, your journey, your pedigree. You've been around the block. But what is that single greatest piece of advice that you received that you take action on every day of your life? I didn't say this was going to be easy. This ain't a softball podcast, man. I've been doing this for a while. We want to give the people out there something to sink. We want people that, I guess, something to sink their teeth into. And if you're watching this on video, you'll look at this guy and be like, this guy definitely has had some worldly information come across his desk.
Yeah, ultimately, I use that word too much, but I don't know that it's a single piece of advice, but it's something that I've taken away from multiple different folks over the years, which is, we're on this earth for, in the cosmic scale, a fraction of a moment. And the best we can hope for is to leave it a little better off than we found it, and make a positive difference to the people that we encounter along the way. So if you focus on that, it puts everything else in perspective.
I love it. And last but not least, you look back on your career and you've reached and surpassed some incredible levels of success. But Hugo Malan, how do you define success?
Success generally involves doing more than you thought possible with the cards in your hand. Take the hand you've been dealt, play it, but add a dash of creativity and a hint of passion and a lot of elbow grease, and do more with it than that hand ever was destined to be.
I love it. Hugo Malan, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Everyone, please check out kellyset.com. We'll link it up in the show notes. We'll check out his podcast. We'll have it there. Where else could folks find you? Where could they connect? Where could they learn more?
Easy to find me on LinkedIn. It's the benefit of having a relatively rare surname, Hugo Malan, and easy to find me on the Kelly website as well.
Check him out there. Hugo, thank you so much for joining me. And everyone out there, if this show resonated with you, leave a review rating. It goes a long way. Sharing means caring. You know where to find out more at thepodcast.com. Follow us on Instagram at NHP Talent, YouTube /thepodcast. Remember, be good to yourself, be better to others, and catch us next week for another great episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.